Breaking news. Benjamin Netanyahu has just detonated a diplomatic nuclear weapon directly in the heart of Westminster, and the shockwaves are threatening to tear Keir Starmer's government apart. In a moment of unprecedented global confrontation that unfolded just minutes ago, the Israeli Prime Minister took to a podium in Tel Aviv and delivered a statement so scathing, so personal, and so utterly destructive that diplomatic protocols have been incinerated instantly. Standing before the world's media, Netanyahu looked directly into the camera and declared, "The British Prime Minister has not just lied to Israel, he has lied to the world, and he has lied to his own people." The silence that followed in newsrooms across London was absolute. This was not a diplomatic rebuke. This was a declaration of political war. But Netanyahu was not finished. With a theatricality that sent chills through the Foreign Office, he lifted a heavy black binder, which he described as the London dossier, and claimed it contained irrefutable proof of a double game being played by Downing Street, one that involves the covert sharing of sensitive Allied intelligence with actors hostile to the State of Israel. The accusation is not just damaging, it is catastrophic. It frames the British government not merely incompetent, but as an active saboteur of Western security architecture. The spark for this explosion was a decision made in the shadows of Whitehall 14 days ago, a decision the government desperately tried to bury under the cover of parliamentary recess. Sources confirm that Starmer's inner circle secretly authorized a freeze on critical intelligence cooperation regarding hostile state actors in the Middle East, a move designed to appease hard-left factions within the Labour Party. They thought the Israelis wouldn't notice, or at least wouldn't retaliate publicly. They were wrong. Netanyahu's response has been calculated to inflict maximum political lethality. He has immediately recalled the Israeli ambassador for urgent consultations, a diplomatic downgrade rarely seen between allies, and has publicly stated that Jerusalem can no longer trust London with sensitive information. The optics are devastating. A British Prime Minister, supposedly the leader of a G7 nation, is being dressed down on the global stage like a junior diplomat caught breaking the rules. The fallout was instantaneous. Within 20 minutes of the broadcast, the White House press secretary issued a statement that was freezing in its brevity, noting that the president is deeply troubled by reports of intelligence breaches in London. Inside number 10, the atmosphere has reportedly collapsed into total hysteria. Senior aides were seen rushing between offices, phones ringing off the hook as panic set in. There was no prepared statement, no defense strategy, and no leadership. Starmer himself has vanished from view, leaving junior ministers to face a barrage of questions they cannot answer. The sense of paralysis is palpable. This is the moment the government feared most, a collision between their domestic political games and the hard reality of geopolitics, and they have lost. The narrative has already been set by Jerusalem. Britain is unreliable, its leader is duplicitous, and its word means nothing. To make matters worse, leaks from inside the intelligence community suggest that MI6 chiefs are furious, having been blindsided by the political decision to withhold cooperation. They know what this means. It means the Five Eyes alliance is looking at Britain with suspicion. It means the special relationship is hanging by a thread. It means the country is less safe tonight than it was this morning. The betrayal here is not just of an ally. It is a betrayal of the primary duty of government, national security. And as the evening news cycles begin to spin up, the question on everyone's lips is simple. How does Keir Starmer survive a charge of betrayal levied by a wartime prime minister in front of the entire world? The international shockwaves triggered by Netanyahu's press conference were immediate, but the domestic fallout has been even more brutal, tearing open wounds in British society that may never heal. As the news spread, the reaction from the British military establishment was swift and merciless. General Sir Richard Howe, a former chief of the defense staff who commanded British forces in Afghanistan, broke his silence in a video statement that has already garnered millions of views across social media. Dressed not in uniform, but in somber civilian clothes, his face etched with fury, he accused the Prime Minister of selling out the honor of the armed forces for cheap political applause. His voice trembling with suppressed rage, he described the intelligence freeze as a dagger in the back of every soldier who has relied on Allied intelligence to stay alive in hostile territory. "We do not play games with the lives of our allies," he said, staring down the lens.
and we do not betray those who fight the same enemy." The emotional impact of his words has been seismic. It has framed the crisis not as a complex diplomatic dispute, but as a simple matter of honor versus shame. And right now, the government is drowning in shame.
While the military rages, the Jewish community in Britain is reeling from a sense of profound abandonment. Synagogues in North London and Manchester have reported a palpable sense of fear, with security details being doubled overnight. The Community Safety Trust has already logged a spike in online threats, fueled by the government's perceived capitulation to anti-Israel sentiment. In a heartbreaking interview on LBC, a rabbi from Leeds described how his congregation feels orphaned by their own government. "We look at Downing Street and we don't see protection anymore," he said, his voice cracking. "We see a government that calculates our safety against their polling numbers." This sentiment was echoed in a blistering editorial by the Jewish Chronicle, which ran with a single-word headline, "Unforgivable." The article accused Starmer of breaking the fundamental covenant between the state and its minority communities, the promise of protection without condition. The moral weight of these accusations is crushing. It paints a picture of a government that has lost its moral compass, willing to sacrifice the safety of its own citizens to appease political extremists. Meanwhile, the silence from Britain's European partners is deafening. In Paris and Berlin, diplomats are refusing to comment, a diplomatic signal that translates clearly as, "You are on your own." Privately, Foreign Office sources admit that credibility in European capitals have evaporated. "They are looking at us like we are a rogue state," one senior diplomat whispered to a journalist. "You don't recover from being called a traitor by an ally. It sticks." The sense of isolation is absolute. Britain appears adrift, untethered from its traditional alliances, floating in a geopolitical no-man's land, created entirely by the Prime Minister's incompetence. And then came the leaks. In a devastating blow to the government's attempts to contain the story, a classified memo from the Ministry of Defense surfaced on Telegram channels. The document, dated 3 days prior to the crisis, warns explicitly that freezing intelligence cooperation would catastrophically undermine UK security interests. Starmer signed it anyway. This proof of deliberate negligence has turned the crisis from a political blunder into a potential criminal dereliction of duty. The public is seeing a leader who was warned of the danger, who understood the risks, and who chose to put his party management ahead of the nation's safety. The anger on the streets is visceral. In central London, opposing groups are already gathering, with police struggling to keep them apart. The atmosphere is febrile, heavy with the threat of violence. Ordinary people, already exhausted by the cost of living crisis, are watching their government implode over a foreign policy disaster of its own making. The betrayal feels personal. It feels like the adults have left the room, leaving the country in the hands of student politicians, playing with live ammunition. As night falls, the sense of doom is overwhelming. This is not just a bad news cycle. This is a system failure. The institutions that are supposed to protect the nation, the intelligence services, the military, the diplomatic corps, are screaming in unison that the government has failed. And the man at the top, the man who promised competence and stability, is nowhere to be found. He is hiding in number 10, hoping the storm will pass. But the storm is not passing. It is gathering strength, fed by the fury of betrayed veterans, frightened communities, and a public that suddenly realizes their prime minister has led them into a trap from which there is no easy escape. Then came the intervention that transformed this diplomatic disaster into a constitutional emergency. In a move that historians are already calling the most significant royal rupture of the 21st century, King Charles has stepped into the fray. Breaking decades of steely silence on political matters, the monarch reportedly held an unscheduled, high-tension audience with the Prime Minister at Buckingham Palace just hours after the news broke. While the meeting was private, the palace, in a move that can only be interpreted as deliberate, allowed the king's deep distress to be leaked to the press via senior courtiers. The message was unmistakable and devastatingly precise. The Crown expects the government to honor its treaties, for the word of the nation is the bond of the king.
This was a royal rebuke of nuclear proportions. It signaled that the monarch views the government's actions not just as bad policy, but as a stain on the honor of the British state itself. The king, a man who swore an oath to protect the realm, has effectively signaled that he believes the prime minister is endangering it. The symbolism is shattering. Starmer is no longer just fighting an angry opposition. He is fighting the weight of British history.
The economic markets, sensing blood in the water and instability at the helm, reacted with brutal efficiency. The pound sterling took a nosedive against the dollar within minutes of the palace leak, wiping billions off the value of British companies. City traders, already jittery about the government's fiscal competence, viewed the diplomatic breakdown as proof that the UK is entering a period of erratic, unpredictable governance. Britain is becoming uninvestable, warned the CEO of a major transatlantic investment fund on Bloomberg TV. If they can't keep a simple promise to a strategic ally, how can they be trusted with a 10-year infrastructure contract? Defense stocks plummeted, with BAE Systems and other major contractors seeing their value eroded as investors feared a retaliatory freeze on British defense exports by the US and Israel. The economic pain is real, and it is immediate. It translates into higher import costs, shakier pensions, and a business community that is rapidly losing faith in the government's ability to provide a stable operating environment. Inside the labor movement, the fractures are widening into chasms. While the hard left celebrates the snub to Israel, the moderate wing of the party is in open revolt. Trade union leaders representing defense workers are furious, warning that the diplomatic row puts thousands of high-skilled manufacturing jobs in the north of England at risk. "This isn't solidarity, it's economic suicide," shouted one union boss in a hastily arranged press conference outside a factory in Lancashire. The spectacle of a Labour Prime Minister being attacked by his own industrial base adds another layer of chaos to the unfolding disaster. The party is tearing itself apart, forced to choose between its ideological fringe and the economic reality of the country it governs. And in the middle of it all sits Keir Starmer, paralyzed, silent, and shrinking with every passing hour.
The public mood has shifted from confusion to cold, hard anger. A Snap YouGov poll conducted this afternoon shows the government's approval rating crashing by 8 points in a single day, a statistical collapse rarely seen outside of general election campaigns. The word incompetent is trending on every social media platform attached to images of the Prime Minister. People feel unsafe, they feel embarrassed, they feel that their country is being laughed at on the world stage. The narrative has taken hold that this government is not just weak, but dangerous, that they are amateurs playing with fire. And as the King's judgment echoes across the airwaves, a terrifying realization is settling in. The mechanisms of state are jamming. The Prime Minister cannot command the confidence of the King, the military, the intelligence services, or the economy. The system is failing. And when the system fails, consequences are unavoidable. The pressure cooker is whistling, and the lid is about to blow off.
The paralysis in Westminster has now metastasized into a full-blown existential crisis for the Labour government. What began as a diplomatic spat has mutated into a death spiral for Keir Starmer's authority. Senior civil servants, the permanent machinery of the state, are reportedly engaging in damage limitation exercises that effectively bypass Downing Street. Whispers from Whitehall suggest that the cabinet secretary has opened direct back channels to Washington and Jerusalem in a desperate attempt to salvage the intelligence relationship, acting almost as a caretaker government while the actual prime minister remains besieged. This is the ultimate humiliation. The bureaucracy is stepping in to save the country from its elected leader. It creates a terrifying vacuum at the heart of power. Who is actually in charge of Britain's nuclear deterrent tonight? Who is making the decisions? The answer, terrifyingly, appears to be no one. The political sharks are circling. The Conservative opposition, sensing a mortal wound, has launched a ferocious parliamentary offensive, tabling an emergency motion of no confidence in the Prime Minister's handling of national security. But the real danger comes from within. Reports are flooding in of a shadow operation being run by ambitious cabinet rivals who are already sounding out backbenchers for a potential leadership challenge. They know the ship is sinking, and they are scrambling for the lifeboats.
The unity that Starmer prized above all else has evaporated, replaced by the toxic stench of betrayal and survivalism. WhatsApp groups are lighting up with plots, counterplots, and leaking strategies. Every hour that Starmer remains silent, another MP decides that his time is up. The loyalty of the parliamentary party was always thin. Now, faced with the prospect of electoral annihilation, it is non-existent.
Internationally, the humiliation continues to compound. The U.S. Secretary of State has canceled a scheduled call with the Foreign Secretary, a diplomatic snub of the highest order. Instead, Washington announced a sudden review of all technology sharing agreements with the UK. This is the nightmare scenario. If Britain loses access to American military tech, its armed forces are effectively rendered obsolete overnight. The strategic consequences of this single week of incompetence could last for a generation. Former diplomats are weeping on television, describing the destruction of 50 years of trust in 50 hours of madness. We are witnessing the end of Britain as a serious power, lamented a former ambassador to the UN. We have relegated ourselves to the children's table, and the legal threats are beginning to mount. Lawyers representing veterans groups and families of terror victims are preparing a class action lawsuit against the government for endangering life through negligence. They argue that the intelligence freeze directly increases the risk of attacks on British soil. If this case gains traction, it will drag ministers into court to testify under oath about their decision-making processes. The prospect of a prime minister being cross-examined about why he prioritized party politics over public safety is a political death sentence. The walls are closing in from every side: legal, political, diplomatic, and economic. There is no exit strategy. There is no spin doctor in the world who can fix this. The narrative of change has been replaced by a narrative of collapse. The government is not governing. It is decomposing in real time before the eyes of a horrified nation.
As the sun sets on the darkest day in Keir Starmer's premiership, the atmosphere in London is heavy with the promise of more chaos to come. The city is bracing for the markets to open tomorrow, fearing another run on the pound. The police are cancelling leave, anticipating civil unrest as opposing protests converge on Parliament Square. And inside the bunker of Downing Street, the silence is deafening. The Prime Minister is alone. His allies have deserted him, his party is plotting against him, and the world has turned its back on him. The sheer scale of this implosion is difficult to comprehend. In less than 48 hours, a stable government has been reduced to a smoking ruin. But the final blow is yet to land. Rumors are swirling of a second London dossier, a supplementary file held by Israeli intelligence that supposedly contains transcripts of private conversations between labor ministers and banned organizations. If these transcripts exist, and if they are released, it will not just be the end of a government. It will be the end of the Labour Party as a credible force in British politics for decades. The threat hangs over Westminster like a guillotine blade. Every phone notification, every breaking news banner sends a jolt of adrenaline through the political class. They are waiting for the other shoe to drop.
The country stands at a precipice. The social contract is fraying. The trust between the people and power has been shattered. We are witnessing the real-time disintegration of political authority. The questions that hang in the air tonight are terrifying. Can the government survive the week? Will the king remain silent? And what else does Benjamin Netanyahu have in that black binder? The clock is ticking relentlessly towards a reckoning that feels biblical in its proportions. The British people are watching, waiting, and wondering, is this the end of the Starmer era? And if it is, what kind of ruin will be left behind? Stay tuned, because the truth is coming, and it cannot be stopped.